Well, obviously the country made this decision. The NFU had its position leading up to the referendum. That's yesterday's debate. Now we move forward. We've got a lot of work as an NFU for the next number of months to prepare a domestic agricultural policy, and the challenge now we face is to turn those challenges into opportunities for British farming. Well, obviously huge concern, uncertainty. I don't need to say to you how difficult farming has been in the last 18 months from a cash flow point of view. Commodity values have fallen. We've seen huge pressure on dairy farmers, on arable farmers, pig farmers. So those issues are still there. So those farmers need that financial support. There's the uncertainty. But again, I've had a reassurance from the Agricultural Commissioner, Phil Hogan, through a letter that financial support through the CAP is still going to be there for British farmers while we're still members of the European Union. And I don't believe we'll exit the European Union for at least 2.5 years. So that is a bit of certainty. But now we've got this challenge. We're going to go and consult with our members, nearly 50,000 members, in the next few weeks on what they are looking for in a domestic agricultural policy. Well, there are three major issues. Three major issues are obviously trade negotiations are going to be important. We must not be disadvantaged. The European Union will still be our major sort of export market. If there were import tariffs imposed on us exporting to Europe, that would be a big disadvantage. It's so important that the UK government will not open the gates to a free trade deal and import inferior product from the rest of the world. They must not allow products that's not produced to the same standards as ours enter the UK. Access to labour, extremely important for the horticultural sector, in particular food processing, whether we look at some form of seasonal worker scheme. But again, if we are going to develop an Australian type system, well, food and agriculture and horticulture must be near the top of the priority list. And on farm support, we must not be disadvantaged with our European competitors, because again, as I say, these are the people we're going to be competing with. So if our Dutch, Irish, French farmers are receiving support to a certain level, so should we as British farmers. A key question that we asked the Leave camp leading up to that referendum was, what kind of excess would an independent UK give to imports from the rest of the world? And we are very strong on this point that we should not be open to imports from other parts of the world that are produced to lower standards than in the UK. And that is going to be a big challenge for all of us. As I say, I come back to the personalities around the cabinet table, and when these trade deals are being negotiated, my big concern, we could end up with import tariffs on our agricultural products going into Europe when we do exit. And we could end up with a government that's prepared to open the floodgates from cheaper imports from around the rest of the world. And that will be a double whammy. And possibly if the pound depreciates, or we start seeing some inflation, maybe there'll be people in government who see it as an opportunity to try and lower that inflation through cheaper food, whether it's wheat from the Ukraine, beef from Brazil, lamb from New Zealand and Australia. These are going to be some big, big debates. Well, again, the UK government needs to put the resource into that export market, into the signposting of where those markets are going to be. We know there's a huge demand for red and white meat into China, into other parts of the world. As long as we are competitive as an industry, we are fairly efficient, we need that government support, and I want the new Prime Minister and the Cabinet, whoever they may be, to champion British food and farming. So there doesn't appear to be too much opposition at the moment, but let us hope that the Theresa May becoming Prime Minister will bring some certainty to government. Let's wait to see who she appoints in the Cabinet. The Secretary of State DEFRA is here at the show this morning. I guess she's sort of a bit nervous about the future, and I would dearly like to see the present team at DEFRA returned. Who knows, who'll be there? Should there be a big turnaround or somebody starts playing musical chairs around the cabinet table? And the message to government is quite simple at this stage. It's the importance of food and farming to the UK economy. And the message has to be that food and farming from the people supplying us as farmers, to the farming community, to the food processors, that sector of the economy is worth £108 billion. Well, this is the big debate, because obviously with the letter of certainty from the Ag Commissioner, we should be all right for the next 2.5 years. That gives us time to develop an ag policy, domestic ag policy for the UK, across England, across Wales, and then how that support is distributed, what mechanism is used, that is where we're going to have the debate with the membership. And I guess there'll be so many ideas coming forward, but that is how we will formulate a new policy document, which then we can hopefully influence government in the months ahead. All I will say is that for the next 2.5 years they may not see too much change. That gives us time to formulate, to build on that new domestic ag policy. And again, in the meantime, food and farming is the most important sector in the UK economy. It's worth £108 billion. So again, I want the UK government to champion food and farming. Then I believe British farmers are up for that challenge, and that should create some opportunities for farmers, particularly the young farmers that I've spoken to this morning, for the medium term.
Now, I've been asked to be positive today, to see this as an opportunity rather than a threat, and I will try to do so. But it has to be recognised that farmers face political challenges and no longer have the support of farmers elsewhere in Europe.
Well, I think it was a slight surprise. I mean, I think a lot of people have been expecting a very narrow victory for May. That's not what happened, so we are where we are and we have to move forward.
Now, one of our objectives with our report was to try and get greater attention given to agriculture and the food chain in the referendum debate. We were not very successful, and I am concerned that this will happen again in the Article 50 negotiations.
It's not just a question of the discussion within farming. I think there wasn't sufficient attention in the referendum debate to questions relating to food and agriculture. They got pushed right down the agenda, so there wasn't enough consideration of what the implications might be for the sector. But it's difficult at the moment. I don't think we have sufficiently reliable information. I mean, some of the polls we have been polls where people have selected themselves to respond, so they're not very reliable. So I think we have to drill down into the data a lot more. I mean, there has been some suggestion that livestock farmers were more likely to vote leave than arable farmers, but at the moment I don't have any data that actually confirms that. Well, I think they will probably keep the basic payment structure, because otherwise they'd have to devise a completely new administrative scheme. But I imagine that the amount that is paid is going to reduce quite significantly over time.
Now, the future of subsidies is clearly a matter of concern for many enterprises, because they make the difference between running at a profit and running at a loss. Pillar 2 subsidies, as we pointed out in the report, are in many cases protected by contracts that run beyond 2020. But we are also confident that there was a strong domestic coalition of support for the continuation of agri-environmental subsidies, but hopefully putting right some of the failings in the existing scheme. There also needs, I think, to be some discussion about whether subsidies should move up the hill to livestock farms. I just pose that as a question, not a recommendation. We were much less confident about Pillar 1, or basic payment subsidies. We didn't think they would be abolished, but we did think they would be a target for the Treasury. It has to be recognised that falls in tax revenue, some of which may be longer term, will put public expenditure under greater pressure in the future, even though the budget surplus target has been rightly abandoned. Inertia would suggest that a modified form of the basic payment will be used, hopefully with fewer form filling complexities and, of course, payments actually being made to farmers on time. I'm clear that there will be no return to the deficiency payments that were used in the past before we joined the common market in 1973, because it's very difficult to forecast how much they would cost in any one year.
Well, I think what is important is for the NFU and others to work out what the objectives of a post-BREXIT policy should be, and what are the best means of achieving those objectives. I mean, there have been a lot of problems in the past with over-complex policies which need to be simplified, and hopefully that's something we can do with domestic policy. Well, our working party is going to be continuing its work. We're going to look at all aspects of the negotiations, but we're also going to think about this question of what a future domestic agricultural policy should be. One of the problems now is, of course, that because it's a devolved responsibility, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will have their own very distinctive policies, and they are likely to invest more in farming than the rural economy. But I think we have to match that to some extent, otherwise it's not a level playing field. That's the problem, that English farmers will not only be competing with farmers elsewhere in Europe, but they may face a more subsidised or supported environment in the other parts of the United Kingdom. Well, remember, the present subsidies will continue until we've finished the negotiations. We haven't started the Article 50 process yet. It's likely to take up to 2 years, so they've got a couple of years or a little bit more perhaps to adjust to the new situation and think about what they're going to do.